What if the Dark Ages had simply not happened? Imagine, no decay, no monastery candles flickering over the last manuscripts, and no barbarians finding the library a good place to make a fire. Sounds like a fantasy, right? But let's assume for a moment that the Western Roman Empire hadn't collapsed like a house of cards, and that knowledge of antiquity hadn't gone on a long vacation. What would we have gotten? A global renaissance in the 7th century? Or maybe Charlemagne would have invented Wi-Fi to send his barons memes about jousting tournaments. This thought is intriguing because the Dark Ages are not just a historical label, but a period when Europe seems to have decided to pause and think, do we really need all these aqueducts and philosophies? We used to think of it as a time of stagnation, but what if there was no such thing as stagnation? What if science, art, and technology didn't stop, but rush forward like Roman chariots at top speed? This idea is disturbing because it makes us think about how fragile our achievements are and how one event could change everything, from the way we make coffee to the way we argue about politics over lunch. Let's face it, history likes to play tricks on us. Take Emperor Nero, who is said to have played the lyre while Rome burned. Imagine if he had founded the first school of art instead. Maybe we would have already had an opera about space wars in the 10th century. Or think about the barbarian leaders who burst into cities shouting, "Where is your Senate?" If they had sat down at the negotiating table instead, we might have avoided several centuries of chaos and would have had self-governing carriages instead of horses leaving surprises on the pavement. This topic is not just a game of what if. It is about how close we were to another world. History is not a boring textbook, but a thriller with unexpected twists and turns where one wrong step could change everything. So sit back, grab a coffee, or, if you're in the spirit of antiquity, a glass of wine, and let's find out what would have happened if the Dark Ages had remained just a scary fairy tale. There is a story ahead that you won't be able to put down because we are not just rewriting history. We are painting a world where everything went differently. And believe me, there is something to laugh at and something to think about. So, let's imagine that the Western Roman Empire did not fall in 476. Let's say that Emperor Romulus Augustulus was not the last to fall, but was more cunning than people think. Instead of giving the throne to the barbarian Odoacre, he made a deal with him. You get the land, I get the power, and together we build Empire 2.0. The barbarians, it turns out, are not so wild. They like Roman baths and wine, so they agree. And so, instead of the chaos of the 5th century, we have a stable state that holds the borders, develops trade, and, most importantly, does not let the knowledge of antiquity gather dust in monasteries. The 5th century, a new start in this alternative history. Rome does not lose its infrastructure. Aqueducts pump water, roads are buzzing with carts of goods, and schools still teach Euclid's geometry and Cicero's rhetoric. Without the collapse of an empire, there is no power vacuum, so there is no need to invent feudalism with its "I am your lord and you are my serf." Instead, cities grew, and trade with Constantinople, China, and even distant Indian principalities flourished. Imagine a Roman merchant in the 6th century drinking tea from the Middle Kingdom and complaining that it takes 2 months to get silk delivered. Something has to be done about it, he thinks, and this is the first step towards future logistics revolutions. Science does not stand still. In the real world, many ancient texts have been lost, but here the libraries of Alexandria and Rome are cultural hubs where scientists debate the nature of the stars and experiment with mechanics. Archimedes, whose spirit seems to have never left scientists, inspires the creation of the first steam engines. Don't laugh. Heron of Alexandria played with steam in the 1st century, but no one took his ideas seriously. In our world, one of the Roman engineers said, "Hey, what if this thing could move carts?" By the 7th century, primitive steam engines for mills and even experimental self-propelled platforms appeared. They are slow and smoke like a hungover dragon, but it's a start. The 7th century. Renaissance without delay. Without the Dark Ages, there is no religious dogmatism that has hindered science in the real world. The church, of course, exists, but it is more busy organizing schools and hospitals than burning heretics. Imagine Pope Gregory I writing a treatise on optics instead of hymns because a monk in Rome invented the first lenses. "This is a miracle of God," says Gregory, but adds, "Let's figure out how it works." By 650, the first glasses appeared in Europe, and elderly scholars no longer complained that the letters in the codes were too small. Culture is flourishing, Without a break in education, poets write not only in Latin, but also in local languages, which are rapidly becoming literary. Imagine, Italian, French, and Spanish literature are born not in the 13th, but in the 7th century. In Britain, a Celtic bard writes an epic saga about local heroes, and it's not just Beowulf, it's a whole series of novels that are read from Cornwall to Constantinople. Theaters that have closed in reality are working here without interruption. In Rome, comedies are staged to ridicule overly ambitious senators, and in Athens, tragedies are revived with new plots about traveling to the stars. The 9th century, a technological leap. By the 9th century, Europe was no longer a fragmented kingdom, but a network of cities connected by roads and canals. Without feudal chaos, trade and the exchange of ideas flourish. Chinese gunpowder reaches Europe not as a weapon, but as a basis for mechanical experiments. Imagine a Roman engineer seeing fireworks and thinking, what if I put it in a pipe and direct it? By 850, the first steam guns appeared, not for war, but for mining ore in mines. There are wars, of course, but they are more like chess games, smaller armies and more cunning diplomacy. Education becomes massive. Without the Dark Ages, monasteries are no longer the only centers of knowledge, so schools are opening in every major city. Women, by the way, are also getting access to education. Not everywhere, but in Rome and Constantinople, it is already the norm. Imagine a senator's daughter writing a treatise on the movement of the planets while her brother argues about taxes in the Senate. By 900, astronomers already suspect that the Earth revolves around the sun, but fortunately, no one is burned for such thoughts. Everyone is too busy calculating orbits. The 11th century, a world without borders. Until the 11th century, our world was a proto-globalized civilization. Europe, Byzantium, and China exchanged not only goods but also technology. Imagine, a Roman engineer travels to Kaifeng to look at their water mills, and a Chinese scientist in Rome studies steam engines. America, by the way, was discovered earlier. Some desperate merchants from Spain sailed to Mesoamerica in the 9th century, looking for the Golden Islands. Instead of conquest, they trade, and by 1100, the Maya are already building their pyramids with Roman arches. Technology is reaching its peak. Steam engines become more compact, and the first mechanical carts appear in cities. They are not yet faster than horses, but the rich are already boasting about them like modern businessmen boast about yachts. Printing, which appeared later in the real world, was invented here in the 8th century, thanks to the exchange of ideas with China. Books became cheap, and by 1100, every burgher could have at least one codex with poems or a treatise on nature at home. Newspapers, by the way, were already in their infancy. The Daily News was published in Rome, reporting on Senate debates and olive oil prices. Influence on the present. If the Dark Ages had not happened, by the 15th century we would have had a world that resembled our own, but with a different flavor. Imagine cities with steam trams, where scientists argue about electricity and poets write about flights to the stars. Politics would have been different. Without feudalism, democracy could have been born earlier. Although, knowing human nature, senators would still have quarreled for power. Religion would have been softer without isolation and fear of darkness. The church would have been more concerned with education than with crusades. But there is also irony. Imagine a Roman bureaucrat complaining that steam engines pollute the air and the Senate cannot agree on green laws. Or how merchants in the 12th century went on strike because the taxes on silk from China were extortionate. Human nature doesn't change. We would still argue, love, and make mistakes, just in a different environment. Here we are at the end of our journey through a world where the Dark Ages never came. Imagine yourself in this 15th century. You are sitting in a Roman coffee shop, reading a fresh newspaper printed on a mechanical press, and outside the window a steam carriage is humming, carrying tourists to the Colosseum. The Senate is debating whether to build a tower to the stars for astronomers, and somewhere in Constantinople, the first drawings of electric lamps are being drawn. The world is faster, brighter, but like ours, it is full of dramas and comedies. Because, people will always be people, whether they have a pen in their hand or a steam engine in their garage. This alternative history makes us think, how fragile is our world? One successful deal, one saved manuscript, and we could live in a different reality. We might be colonizing Mars or fighting over space taxes, but we'd still be laughing at stupid Senate speeches. The irony is that we would probably still be complaining it was better before steam engines were invented. It is human nature to always want more than you have. This story is not just a fantasy. It reminds us how closely everything is connected. One event leads to another, and here we are in another world. Our real path was a thorny one, with wars, decline, and slow revival. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we needed these dark ages to learn to appreciate the light, both literally and figuratively. Although, let's face it, I wouldn't mind living in a world where Nero sings opera and Charlemagne launches the first steamship. So let's think about these what if together. If you enjoyed imagining how history could have turned out differently, please like this story. It's like saying, good job, keep it up. Subscribe because there are many more stories to come, where we will turn the past upside down and laugh at how things could have been. Write in the comments what you would add to this world without the Dark Ages. Maybe Roman fast food or live Senate debates. Let's figure out together how history would have turned out.